Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective, a space where we get to the heart of issues. We ask those awkward questions which allow us to set context and to be able to actually also get to solutions. Too many programs, too much noise online simply focuses on reactionary and shallow debates and arguing for the sake of arguing without getting to the core of the issue. Well, we're not going to do that on this show today, for sure. I have the pleasure of welcoming political analyst and researcher Ehsan Safarnejad, and I'm going to really discuss with him a really tough topic, which is the issue around preventing a war on Iran. Not everybody wants to prevent a war on Iran, but any sane person, any civilized individual would recognize that a war on Iran is not like a war on Gaza. It's not any other kind of war. It's a war which will involve potentially intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear weapons could get involved, and the entire world's energy could be shut down. Those are the stakes. That's just for starters. So who's pushing for this war? Well, Benjamin Netanyahu loves wars, doesn't he? He loves genocide, and he'd love another one, ideally on Iran. Only he's not brave enough to do it on his own, and he's ramping up the narratives and the propaganda for Donald Trump to weigh in and to come and do his dirty work for him. That's my opinion already, so I'm putting my chips on the table. There are other aspects, and we don't want to get emotional about these things. We know that there is realpolitik and there are imperialist interests, and that's how nations operate. There are also moral and principle issues as well, and that's where the ordinary public and you and I guess, would like politicians to pitch themselves, but economic expediency, power, resource acquisition, these seems to be the things that are driving global politics. Can we push back against it? Well, let's see how we could do it perhaps in this context of Iran. Welcome to the show, Ehsan. Good to have you on board.
Hi, thanks for inviting me to your show.
So let me kick off. First of all, we've seen the 12-day war. We saw Israel basically attack another sovereign nation, violate its independence, and attempt to basically bring it to heel for the Americans or for the moneylender mafia. That's usually my understanding. And they failed, basically, because they got a bloody nose, it seems. There were a lot of very precise strikes that Iran managed to hit Israel with. The first time any nation state actually has hit Israel on that scale, or at all possibly. Round two is still very much in the offing. First of all, what's your take on the possibility of another phase?
Well, considering the amount of ammunition that has been flown into the region, I would say that it's more of an inevitability than anything else. But we are currently in a sort of security dilemma. You have to understand that there are a lot of flights coming from Moscow to Tehran, and well, my guess is as good as anyone else's guess about the content of these military cargoes. But let's for a second put ourselves in the shoes of these genocidal maniacs in Israel. How would they interpret this? Well, they will interpret this as Iran getting ready. Now, there are a couple of things. I know for a fact that Iran does not like to have preemptive strikes on other countries. I know this. But I can't expect my enemy to, hold my values as well. So it is unclear to them as to what Iran is currently doing. They might be concerned about Iran's preemptive attack on them. And this is something that a person like Avigdor Lieberman, former war minister of the Zionist entity, has talked about. So in that regard, they're seeing all these weapons coming to Tehran, and you see the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu going on Benjamin Shapiro's show and talking about how Iran is building intercontinental ballistic missiles. So it seems that on the psychological level, they are getting ready for that war. They have already started their propaganda campaign against Iran. From 13th of June, to 19th of June, there were 800 military cargo flights towards Tel Aviv, bringing them weapons, munitions. They have received big cargo of guidance kits for their Blue 9, for example, ballistic missiles, and other actually munitions as well. So from their stated goal, from what they are seeing from the Iranian side, and from the very basic fact that they went all out in order to dismantle the Iranian government, in order to make it collapse, but they failed. Now, well, their understanding possibly is that, well, Iran is going to retaliate because they tried their best in order to kill it. So they expect a retaliation based on their own action. That's in their calculus. So I would say that it's only a matter of time when the war happens.
Well, 25% of, I think, the very, very expensive military hardware which America supplies to Israel, missiles in particular, needed replenishing. So one would imagine that they're going to do that. They didn't do a very good job of defending Israeli territory last time. All sorts of very, very important installations, military installations, which Iran targeted. And that's got to be emphasized. Iran did try to, I think, control its attack so it didn't affect the civilian population. That wasn't the case with Israel. The reality is they went for the same strategy they had with Gaza, that they didn't discriminate between civilian areas that they hit and otherwise. So there is a kind of a difference in the kind of philosophy of war between these two nations, which I think has to be pointed out. But it seems that the Americans, if they do arm Israel to the teeth, they'll have to do it on a much, much bigger scale to have any chance of defeating Iran. The possibility of defeating Iran seems almost impossible in terms of the military and the geostrategic perspective, because it's such a huge nation. It has a huge arsenal of missiles. It has a standing army which is, much bigger than Israel's. Israel couldn't even think of invading Iran. It would stand no chance. But the Americans themselves would have to think twice about any such thing. So if you can't get a land invasion of a nation like Iran, if you can't actually defeat it in a military war, what are the backup options? What's the next thing that Israel and America would do? Because I can't see them doing any kind of invasion exercise to bring down Iran. What do you think they're planning, perhaps, other than that?
Well, I have to first push against some of the things that you said. I mean, you're actually quoting some stats that are publicly available. But I do believe when we see so many different analysts talk about using 25% of the overall stockpile of THAAD missiles, THAAD interceptors, and we have to take a step back and see and wonder, why is it now such a big, strong talking point? Because, I mean, it has been my experience that anything that becomes very widespread, it can't come from grassroots. It's normally something that the empire wants you to think.
Right.
And then you also think about the fact that it's the THAAD missiles that we're talking about, one of the top-notch air defense systems that United States has produced. So I would assume that the number of the THAAD interceptors is a highly classified number. So I'm deeply confused as to why suddenly it's such a big deal, and everyone is talking about 25%. So I'm not really sure about that.
Sure.
I've been following military analysts talking about how either Ukraine is going to fall or Russia's stockpile of missiles are going to end. I think that this is a propaganda campaign in order to disseminate disinformation so as to create a sort of wrong calculus in the adversary so that they would be surprised and caught on guard. So that's the first thing that I like to mention.
Fair point.
But with regards to the options of the Israeli regime, we have to talk about this on different level. it's not merely the matter of capabilities that Israel has. And in some regards, Israel does possess, very outstanding military capabilities, unfortunately. But for example, I think the Golden Horizon air-launched ballistic missile that they have, it's a very impressive missile. So I can't deny that. I can't deny the progression and this incremental advancement of Raphael industry, right? We can't really put that aside. But even setting that aside, even if we don't talk about that and we don't go into the details, we have to address this problem that we have. Israelis have shown that they are able to engage with Iran in these very short burst of wars, in which they come, inflict a certain amount of damage, and as the war gets the sort of the balance of the war and damages tilts towards the benefit of Iran, they call for the ceasefire. This happened in October attack of 2024 when Israel attacked on Iran, and there were a lot of people, including myself, who were saying that the Iranian air defense systems weren't as badly damaged as the Israelis were claiming. But
Sure.
they repeated the same thing during the 12-day war. So one has to wonder, with the limited amount of resources, I'm mostly referring to the financial resources of Iran, how long can Iran actually have these pauses and these short bursts of wars against Israel, in which Israel comes, delivers a rather significant damage to Iran? Maybe significant is an exaggeration, but considerable. We can say that those are considerable damages. The thing is that Israel has the backing of United States. We do not have that. We don't have that endless amount of cash that flows into Iran. So I think that Israelis, by managing the battlefield, by controlling the parameters and preventing the war into becoming a widespread, both in terms of space and time, they can actually deal significant amount of damage to Iran. And this was something that I was very critical of. When the war started by the Israelis and they attacked Islamic Republic of Iran. Prior to everything, they mentioned that their intention is for the war to prolong, to last for about 2 weeks. When did the war end? 12 days. So that was one of the main reasons that I was talking about, how Islamic Republic, even if this single reason is the sole justification that Iran would continue the war for longer than that, it would be worth it for Iran to basically disrupt and challenges the whole regime of calculus in the Israeli genocidal regime, so that they would think twice before attacking Iran. Alas, unfortunately, my analysis is not really popular amongst the decision makers.
Yeah, fascinating, but it's a great angle to look at. Should Iran have continued the fight, even though it was Trump who weighed in essentially and tried to get this wrapped up? If Israelis were so confident and the Americans were so confident of Israel's success or continued success, they wouldn't have called for that ceasefire. So, yeah, the question is, why go into a ceasefire when it's the enemy who's actually wanting it? Perhaps it should have continued and given them a harder lesson. Nonetheless, now deterrence. Of course, there's been a lot of talk, you also mentioned it, that these Russian flights are coming in, but there's been talk also of China and the J-10 systems. I can't help but recall the success that the Pakistan Air Force had against the Indians, who had the Rafale aircrafts and fighter systems, but the Pakistanis had the Chinese airspace control, the technological systems which aided and abetted their pilots to be able to actually counter these Western, very, very sophisticated Western aircraft, to the point where I think something like 5 or 6 Indian aircraft, 3 or 4 of them Rafales, were downed before any Pakistani real damage was done to their air force. Is that the direction, do you think, perhaps, that Iran has to go? Perhaps to move, if it doesn't have the quality of defense mechanisms which could provide deterrence against an Israeli attack. Is that a direction, the Chinese option?
Well, first of all, I like to talk about the fact that many of the information that are coming out, unfortunately, is simply not true. And sometimes it's rather complicated as to explain why that is the case, because I know for a fact that some Iranian member of parliament was involved in saying certain things that weren't quite actually true. So, first of all, I like to warn people against jumping on the bandwagon of all these Telegram channels or Twitter accounts that are disseminating these informations. Considering the amount, the hardship that I have to go through in order to find out what's going on, and I have certain sources, I'm very shocked as to how all these people know about the content of these military cargo airplanes. Setting that aside, currently we're not just talking about the efficiency of weaponry. We're also restricted by the time restriction. Right, that's also a certain factor that we should really be aware of. So in this case, when we hear the delivery of MiG-29 fighter jets to Iran, which I think this is the kind of rumor that is worth our attention, worth our time. We have to understand that actually this makes sense because of the fact that it was used in Iran. It's something that Iran can, basically receive. And then, with regards to training pilots, you don't have that overhead time, or the fact that Iran can integrate it well into its defense doctrine, the fact that Iran can improve it, So these might be the reasons behind why Iran decided to go with MiG-29 rather than J-10, which is a newer fighter jet. Yes, it is. But for the specific reasons that we mentioned, mostly time restrictions,
Right.
and the fact that we don't know when the next Israeli attack on Iran will be. These are the main reasons as to why MiG-29 might have been chosen by Iran. Apart from that, we have already seen what is supposedly a leaked document, and I can't stress this enough. This is supposedly a leaked document about, the internal documents of a company that is responsible for basically producing certain parts of Sukhoi Su-30, and despite the fact that this is something that has been talked about for ages now. Considering the analyst and the resources that I know, the sources that I know have talked about this, I would say that this is more important. But apart from this, I hear the name of HQ9 being mentioned a lot. People have to understand. One of the main things that Iran needs is the air defense system against drones, against drone swarms.
Sure.
So in that sense, when a person like me hears about military export, but then here's HQ9, which is similar to S-300. And again, Iran has Bawa 373, which is more advanced than S-300, but falls short of the capabilities of S-400. And I see that, okay, the problem that we had was with regards to the drone swarms that were flown towards these air defense systems that were made in order to intercept fighter jets, but were surprised by these other flying objects. I would think, why not purchase Sky Hunter air defense system from China, whose sole responsibility, whose sole task is to intercept these drone swarms. So that's what I talk about. Like some of these things that you see online, they're not even smart rumors. Because when you look at it from the technical standpoint, you would say, if I wanted to start a rumor for the clickbait,
Yes.
knowing the knowledge that I would have, I would say, wait, Iran is purchasing a Sky Hunter air defense system. That would be much more plausible than something like HQ9. But having said that, I don't know. Maybe the production rate of the Iranian military industry is in such way that they have to use other countries in order to, have basically a quick repairment of their air defense rings.
Well, absolutely fascinating, and some very good warnings about how we use data and how who we listen to. I think those are really, really pertinent points. And let me swing over to another angle that, say, if Israel, if I was in the IDF, God forbid, if I was, I'd be looking at the vulnerabilities of Iran. One of the vulnerabilities they identified, of course, was those insurgency forces. The MKO are well known, but there must be many others, and the capabilities that Mossad has through groups like the Al-Jundala forces, the ISIS Khorasan linked terrorist groups, the Washington, London linked Takfiri terrorist groups. Those would be an option for me to consider. And another area that I might consider would be how I could utilize ethnic groups. So Iran being bordered by Azerbaijan, being bordered by northern Kurds in Iraq, bordered by Balochistan, all regions which have got track records and evidence of Western-backed, Israeli-backed terror groups, insurgency groups. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that there's investment going into even the PKK, who've made peace with Turkey, that there are lots of these forces that are being prepared. How likely is that, and how good is the Iranian intelligence in terms of picking up these or breaking them up?
Well, just one thing before we move any further. There's a sort of allegory in the Iranian culture. It's about a man who goes and warns a person who was mentally challenged, a retard, an actual retard, that you shouldn't throw a stone at the glass of a mosque. And the mentally challenged person said, "Oh, it's such a good thing that you reminded me of that." So I'm not going to talk about some of the ways by which the Israelis can actually hurt Iran, but let's be very clear. They're very shameless. They have already hinted at the possibility of attacking the Iran drinking water. So this is a major thing that everyone should expect it. So nothing is beyond them. But with regards to what you actually mentioned, you're absolutely right. One of the places that was hit very hardly by, I'm saying very hardly, I meant very harshly, yes, by the Israeli terrorist air force, was northwestern parts of Iran, Azerbaijan. Why did they do so? Because in their calculus was that once they carry out an attack on that region and they weaken the military fractions in those provinces, the resurgence that you actually talked about will be able to declare sort of self-dependence, the independency from the rest of Islamic Republic of Iran, and then that will provide them with like other plans. Maybe Turkey and Azerbaijan could come into play. Azerbaijan have been shamelessly referring to these three provinces of Iran that are mostly Turkish populated, Azeri populated, as southern Azerbaijan, and considering the territorial claims that they make about Armenia, Iran, this is not beyond them. And by the way, we know about the cooperation between the Azeri regime and the Zionist regime. So that's most certainly a possibility. You're absolutely right. One of the ways that they can actually attack Iran, because now we have certain laws and legislations in place that make it rather difficult to repeat what happened in the previous phase of the war. So this time, apart from doing what you actually said, all these separatist groups and terrorist forces that are, behaving under the big banner of self-determination, the wannabe Shah of Iran, I'm referring to Clown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, has issued a software, he has published a software, and it seems that they are pursuing two objectives by this. First of all, anyone who goes and signs into that software, first of all, you're providing them with intelligence, whether you know it or not. When you accept the permissions for that software to be installed on your device, well, you have basically forfeited some of your data to them. Apart from this, they're also working on basically creating a parallel organization, something whose idea is emerging, in my opinion, from Basij division of the IRGC. For those who don't know, Basij is this paramilitary. These are these volunteers who go and help the state in the cases of flood, cases of riots. So these are people who volunteer, civilians who volunteer to help the state, to help the government. So they're looking to make something like that. So that's another investment that they are making. Apart from this, right after the war ended, I don't know, within the week of war ending, there was this guy, Menashe Amir, who is, I think, the head of the Persian division of Israeli radio, and he actually acted as the spokesperson of the Mossad. He wanted to basically recruit the Iranians. So I would say these are the fields that they are actually working on in order to make everything, much, in order to make the situation much trickier. Because just think about the calculus and the complexity of Iran having to fight with an external force, while you see these images in your phone or on your computer about how certain Iranians are demanding liberation or things of that nature. It could be actually very complex, not just with regards to, actually militarily speaking, controlling that situation, because I think that it would be very hard. Very easy. But in terms of the public image, it would be a nightmare. It would be a disaster.
Yeah, it's important you raise this issue of the soft power war, the propaganda, and also cyber warfare, because these are also often, they go under the radar, but they're very much part of this. And one of the things that I note that Iran was very good at bouncing back, having had the initial shock of Israeli attacks and killing of many senior IRGC leaders, etc., and some nuclear scientists, from what I know. They did bounce back for a very sophisticated response. I mean, a very sophisticated precision response, which Israel really had very little answer to be fair. So the capabilities of recovery were there, that's for sure. And one would thought that they'll bolster that. But the cyber warfare is a big deal, and Israel are very good at it. They have massive access to all of the most latest technology, and they also have access through the Americans through all sorts of things that they could do. I'm not sure, but it is one of your areas of specialism, the field of artificial intelligence. How do you think, other than the hundreds of Iranian channels, which the American sponsors, in order to propagandize and to basically feed into Iranian public an anti-establishment, an anti-Iranian establishment set of narratives, one of which, of course, was the Freedom, Life, Women movement, for instance, and the Masa Amini thing. They tried their best to create a whole kind of furore over that. But it seems that also that one of the other things that occurred after this attack by the Israelis was the Iranian public rallied around the government. So in a way, did it backfire on them? Have they just ended up galvanizing the Iranian people and lessened the possibility of a kind of an internal insurgency or revolution, if you like?
I absolutely love the fact that you mentioned that, as you could visibly see my face lit up when you asked that question. So I do believe that Israel made a mistake in attacking Iran. And that's not because I'm an Iranian. When I try to analyze a situation, I put myself in the shoes of the Israelis for a bit, and I think that I'm scum of the earth, genocidal maniac who wants to do whatever is necessary in order to maintain this genocidal regime. What you mentioned is absolutely right. Look, they spent billions and trillions of dollars on waging propaganda warfare against Iran. There's a video of Netanyahu talking about how United States, and I think that this is him talking in United States Congress. He talks about how United States doesn't have to fight against Iran the way that it did with Iraq, Libya, or other countries, because Iranians have what others don't. They have these big dishes, satellite on their tops. They basically, broadcast what he says is, these grander display of wealth by the American youth in Beverly Hills, and they basically can make the Iranian youth very desperate, very feel betrayed, and this soft warfare, as you mentioned. They did all that, and they were very, very successful. With you, if you vain in certain regards. So I think that I have solutions for many things. But if one person would come to me and say, "What is your plan in order to fight against this propaganda that has been disseminated over 3 decades against Iran? What is your solution?" I wouldn't know where to begin. That's such a complicated situation. Take Press TV for example. For example, Press TV is this English-speaking network, right? And now it is not available on these major satellite networks. Now, what is the way to basically ameliorate that situation in order to address that problem? Well, the solution is to have your own satellite in the orbit. Well, Iran has its own satellite, but we're not talking about the satellites that are located in the lower Earth orbits. We're talking about the satellites that are located in 36,000 kilometer range.
I see.
What is called geostationary orbit, geo orbit. Now, that is a very complex thing to do. So we don't even have the infrastructure to begin to address that problem, let alone other issues that we have to face. The fact that the Overton window has been shifted so much to the side of the propaganda by United States that it's a nightmare to address everything. But that was a very big mistake that Netanyahu did. He was initially right in his assessment that the way to address, in order to confront Iran is to push propaganda. But he later on made a mistake by going and doing this, because now you see many people inside Iran actually now becoming very supportive of the Iranian leader, who were previously even anti-Iranian leader. So now they are they really love the Iranian leader to the extent that they choose his picture as their profile picture or even background. Now, I've even heard one girl say, عاشق آقاتون شدم, which means that I have fallen in love with your leader. Pay attention to the words. He still says your leader, your Agha, not mine, but she had that change of heart because everyone saw the role that the Iranian leader played in deterring the enemy. So things have changed, billions and again trillions of dollars, in my opinion. It's very hard to have an assessment of how much money actually has been invested in this black hole of a media campaign against Iran. But one thing that we can say for certain is the fact that all that money, the majority of it, is absolutely gone. They have nothing to show for it. And basically, everything that I said was basically supporting you and, saying how right this assessment of yours in terms of, losing the media warfare inside Iran by attacking Iran was. And in fact, many people inside Iran, no matter how many times I tried to tell them Iran has outstanding missile capabilities, they wouldn't believe me. They wouldn't simply believe me, even though that sometimes even using like technical terms is off-putting for certain people who don't know those things because they think, okay, are they trying to drop like big fancy words in order to deceive us? But now, after seeing what has happened, this acted beyond my imagination. This was actually the best campaign that anyone could put for Islamic Republic of Iran, and how it is basically doing everything that it can in order to push back against these enemies and maintaining the sovereignty of Iran, which is very important for the Iranians, to the extent that some people came from Europe to Iran during the war because they believe that if their country is going to be in a war situation, they have to be inside their country, and even if it's going to collapse, they have to be inside, and they have to sort of sync with their own country to this extent. Right. So that's why you see the surge in the popularity of not just Ayatollah Khamenei, the Iranian leader, but also the IRGC and the Iranian military in general.
So massive own goal there confirms my suspicions, even though we're not living in Iran. But it's fascinating to hear that. That perhaps is a big argument for the Americans to rein in Netanyahu, because any further attacks would, of course, create even more support for the Islamic Republic governance, and that would be against everything they've been trying to do. So it seems baffling as to why they would continue the war. The desperation for war, they justify it through, of course, the one thing that could act as a massive deterrent against any attack on Iran, and that's the nuclear question. That's the line that they've used to justify their attacks and why Netanyahu says that Iran needs to be reined in. But and paradoxically, Ayatollah Khamenei has said we're Islamically not going to create these weapons because they're weapons of mass destruction and it's against our principles. And of course, there are many people who are saying, well, let's bend that law because having that weapon as a deterrent could save us from any attack. And in terms of Israel's full capacity, well, the Samson option is still there, isn't it? And that Samson option means they could press the button on a nuclear weapon, albeit perhaps a limited nuclear arms. That's also there in the background. But this is an interesting area that almost like the Iranians logically should get the nuclear weapon to be like a North Korea to prevent, to act as a deterrent, prevent any attack. And the Israelis shouldn't be using the nuclear issue so much because that simply, it simply pushes Iran even further into saying, yeah, well, let's have that weapon. What do you think about this whole dance around the nuclear issue?
Well, there are many things to unpack there. It was actually a very very detailed question, and it requires a detailed answer. First of all, when it comes to nuclear weapons, you have tactical nuclear weapons as well. Iran needs to spend like 100 missiles on a base in order to destroy it. But if it has a small tactical nuclear weapon with low yield, then it will be able to destroy a military target, a military base, without launching hundreds of missiles at that target. So the missile that we're talking about is a strategic nuclear weapon that creates all that effect. I'm not talking about how I think that there's a sort of loophole in the fatwa or something like that. No, I'm merely expressing my own opinion as an expert on the subject. So
Sure.
I'm not religiously educated, so I'm not even going to address the fatwa.
Sure.
It's not my job to do so. With regards to what you said about Netanyahu, you're absolutely right. But I would also add that Israel has moved to the next stage. They are no longer talking about, they're talking about it, but they are putting more emphasis on the Iranian missile capabilities, which is exactly the reason why Benjamin Netanyahu talks about the intercontinental ballistic missiles. He says that Iran is developing ICBMs as of right now.
That's interesting.
So they have moved to the second stage, right? And now they want to destroy those capabilities. With regards to as to why Israel is seeking to pursue an attack on Iran, you have to understand this actually makes a lot of sense. Imagine that you have two roads in front of you. One is shorter than the other. You want to go from point A to point B. One of these routes are 100 kilometer. The other one is 80 kilometer, 70 kilometer, whatever. But now, and someone has decided to go take that, that 100 kilometer route, which is longer. In the middle of the road, they become aware of this other route that is only 70 kilometer. But you're already half the way. So if you decide to go back and choose the other route, you would actually make another mistake.
Sure.
So when we talk about decision making with regards to the geopolitical apparatus and what is happening, you don't just take into consideration the situation with regards to the environment. You also have to take input the actions that have brought you to this certain juncture in time. And what is the defining action that we have to pay attention to? The fact that the Israelis have attacked Iran. Now that they have opened the Pandora box.
Yes.
You can argue about, just like I did, how it was a bad move, strategically speaking, without taking into consideration any emotion or legality of it, ethics of it. But you can say that now that you have made that mistake, you already have chosen that longer route, that illogical route. Might as well commit to it.
Right.
Because things have profoundly shifted inside Iran. When I talk to people, and it doesn't matter how politically unaware they are, it doesn't matter how geopolitically uneducated they are, to the extent that they still live in to Cold War era, it doesn't matter that, because no one believes that Israel is not going to attack Iran for another, in another instance of basically its long series of aggressions towards Iran. People are not going to believe that. And considering that kind of mentality inside Iran, the Israelis should actually do this. I don't want my country to be attacked. But from the military standpoint, from the strategic standpoint, they should attack Iran because they have already, again, as I mentioned, opened the Pandora box. And all these flights that actually, again, going back to your first question, the answer that I gave to your first question, all these flights that come to Iran, they're a point of concern for the Israelis. Yes, they are genocidal maniacs, but even genocidal maniacs have a perseverance. Apparently, only a reformist doesn't have one, but the Israelis most certainly have it. So yes, I do understand why the Israelis would want to attack Iran for another time.
Well, again, really fascinating area, and we could make a whole program, I guess, around that. But I'm going to come to my final area of this idea of preventing war on Iran or creating the deterrence or the environment globally for that not to happen, just so that the rest of the world will forget about whether you support Iran or not, just because the rest of the world, the last thing it really needs right now is another shutdown of energy, etc., around the world, because the economic crash is inevitable then, and it would impact everybody's lives, regardless of this particular rivalry that Israel has with Iran. I would say that one of the things that the strategy of, say, Qasem Soleimani, and certainly the asymmetric tactics that Iran employed when the Americans and the Israelis, the Zionists, became hell-bent on destroying Iran, literally from the day it was born, 1979, after the revolution. You can evidence how the Americans and the West and the Zionists have plotted and conspired, whether it's from Saddam Hussein or previously through the MKO and the terrorist actions that were going on there, and the destruction of the Iranian parliament, the death of, the martyrdom of Shahid Beheshti and people like Shahid Mutahari. You can see that this antagonism has continued non-stop, this effort for regime change and destruction. And Iran's response seems logical in that context, that being under attack in all these different forms, economically sanctioned, militarily attacked, psychologically being attacked, culturally being attacked. Logical thing for a nation, of course, to keep its sovereignty and stay in power is to respond. And they responded, it seems, by committing to what Imam Khomeini had said, which was that we're going to fight for the mustazifun, the oppressed around the region, and we're there to support them. And we saw the evidencing of that with their support of the Palestinian cause, which is now, I think, inextricably linked to Iran as well in many ways, as part of the strategy that Iran has for causing problems and mayhem in Israel's back door. So it's no longer just the case that Israel has to go on the offensive in Iran. The reality is that their own house is burning. The exodus of Jews from Israel continues through yachts to Cyprus and other places. The economic disaster in Israel continues. The failure to destroy Hamas is still in existence, regardless of whether there's a peace deal currently or not. So there are many things that Iran could argue that the way to deter their enemy is to light fires in their own houses as well, and thereby the enemy actually is the entire network of Zionist-linked nations, including Saudis, including the Kuwaitis, the whole Gulf Arab region, which is where the oil goes. So in a way, Iran is kind of up against all of these guys, whether they're two-faced in a hypocritical manner, aligning themselves sometimes with Iran, as in the case of Qatar, or whether they're just open rivals like the Saudi Arabians. The fact is, there is diplomacy going on, I get that, but that kind of Cold War is also part of the struggle for survival. And it almost seems to me as though Israel feels probably that it's in an existential crisis of survival itself now, because it's up against the Iranian movement, the revolutionary movement, which if it allows it to continue, it would mean potentially the destruction and the dismantling of Israel and perhaps even Zionism in that region. That's a lot. I've thrown a lot at you. I don't expect you to unpack it, but it's another set of factors that maybe one of the best forms of defense for Iran is offense, is to actually continue destabilizing Israel and all its allies in one way or another, because they're trying to destabilize you and destroy you. That war is going on regardless of the missiles and the actual invasion.
Well, the reason that I was taking my time in order to answer your question, or maybe response, because there wasn't really an answer there, a question there. The reason was that it's almost a blasphemy mentioning these kind of tactics to anyone inside the decision-making apparatus of Iran, unfortunately.
Right.
You can't reinvent wheel. There are certain ways that you can address situation. And as much as I like to think of myself as a guy who thinks outside of the box and can come up with unique solutions tailored for different situations, at a certain time you have to go back to the textbook. The Israelis had the periphery doctrine when they started their adventurism in the region. What's the periphery doctrine? It is what they accuse Iran of doing, proxy warfare. They started their country with that. So we're not talking about really groundbreaking things, but unfortunately, I mean, in some aspect, it's very good. The fact that the Iranian military commanders do consider these different resistance groups as their equals and they engage with them on equal footing. It's a very good thing. But the constant speeches given by the Iranian military generals as to how these groups are not our proxy and everything, and then you see what Israel did. If you see someone who doesn't attack you because they think that you have a switchblade in your pocket, you don't go around advertise how you don't actually have a switchblade in your pocket. So I don't know why they did so. From a strategic point of view, I'm vastly against them. I can't really support that ideology, but there are many ways in which Iran can actually shift the war to a great extent. When you see Wall Street, I think it was Washington Post, I might be wrong, but some of these mainstream outlets that talked about how during the genocide that was being carried out by the Israeli regime in Gaza, they were training with IDF in order to fight Iran. And then you go and sign something that what I presumably can think of as one of the most stupid decisions, unfortunately taken by the government of a man whom I dearly loved, Ayatollah Raisi, to go and have a detente or rapprochement with Saudi Arabia, and then by doing so, because you sort of go and basically sign that agreement, you make everything much more complicated to navigate. So, unfortunately, I mean, this is a very sad thing to end your program on, but unfortunately, Iran is so infatuated with being righteous, by being virtuous,
Yes.
that it's not even using the mechanisms and the military tactics, the strategies that you can use, and they can be justified. When you have Saudi Arabia basically forming something like Iran International that disseminates lies about Iran 24/7,
Yes.
incites violence. We're not talking about just inciting disinformation, but inciting violence inside Iran. And then you see that the Saudi Arabian officials, all these officials in these Persian Gulf region, they do everything that they want without having anything to be worried about. UAE is far beyond redemption. They're now working on basically creating the infrastructure in Azerbaijan in order to suffocate and imprison Iran, geopolitically speaking. And then the idea of these people, the brilliant idea that these people have with regards to setting aside dollar as a currency for transactions, international transaction, is to go and use dirham, use the UAE currency. That's a really stupid thing to do. I don't understand why you don't expand your relationship with China, use yuan. But I mean, there are so many things that I can talk about with regards to addressing the situation that we have right now. The fact that all these Arab countries, because of the fact that they know that Iran is more interested in fighting Israel, are doing everything that they can in order to destroy Iran. And by the way, I'm not saying that Iran should change its policy. First and foremost, an enemy of Iran, the top priority for Iran should be Israel. But no one has told you that you can't feint an attack. You can't make it seem that, all these weasel leaders of the region who have been conspiring not only against Iran, but also against the people of Palestine. Remember what IMEC was, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor was basically a big normalization package, a way for these an excuse, I should say, an excuse for these Arab leaders in order to betray and backstab the Palestinian cause, which to a great extent might have been the reason behind the decision that was made by the leaders of Hamas in order to launch the October 7 operation, because they were just simply desperate and they would see that as the end of the Palestinian cause without anyone ever paying attention to it. That's something that I would blame on the powers that have the power in order to make these co-conspiracy, basically co-conspirators of the region who are in cahoots with the Israeli regime. So, yeah.
Well, absolutely riveting analysis, Ehsan. I thank you very much. Real honest appraisals. Nobody can know exactly everything that's happening, but I think you've done a fantastic job in giving us a window into some of the realities and some of the possibilities that are going on. These are the sort of things that help the audience to have a more critical, a more in-depth view. And I'd love to have you back on to maybe deconstruct some of those issues we raised on an even more detailed basis. But it does occur to me that we covered most of what could create a deterrence or prevention of war on Iran and further Israeli and American belligerence in the region. But there is a responsibility that the people have. And I'd like to probably end the show with a reflection that we have the Stop the War movement here in Britain and across Europe and the West. And we have had that Stop the War movement work pretty diligently, give or take some aspects, on stopping the war, on the unjust war on Gaza and the genocide in Palestine. It's whipped up an entire emotion within people where they understand that war is a bad thing and that the Israelis and the Americans and the West generally are on the wrong side of history within these wars. It's taken them a long time because they've been at it since at least the first Gulf War, which was Saddam's attack on Iran, which the West was involved in 100%. And since then, it seems like for 40 years, 50 years on, finally the Western public is waking up to the reality that our economies and our nations are built on the death, blood and guts of little children across West Asia, stretching from Afghanistan all the way to Libya. This is a realization that perhaps we need to also take into account in the instance of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And our responsibility to stand up against war should be, an unjust war or a war of oppression, a war of plunder, a war of resource acquisition that's centered in the halls of the City of London or Wall Street or Washington, D.C. or Tel Aviv, because that's where most of these wars are hatched, that's where they're planned, and that's where they're executed, and that's where they're funded from. So the responsibility of Western public in terms of stopping wars goes well beyond just Palestine. And I would say that any war in West Asia which comes at the root from this axis has to be opposed on a moral basis, on the basis that we are not people who want the blood of children on our hands anymore. Millions have died because of our failure, in part, not to rein in our governments and not to take the stand. I won't even count the Arabs, of course, the Arab nations that are not overthrowing their governments, the puppet governments, which are Zio-imperialists as well. We've talked about them. There needs to be revolution of thinking. There needs to be, and now I am going to get emotional because I think without a human civilizational value, and if we're just reduced to talking about things from a geopolitical, strategic interest basis, then humanity is doomed, because we're doomed to committing to a world in which, profit and plunder and might are the only arbiters of how we will create the future of humanity. Well, that's what I guess Genghis Khan and most of the imperialists did in the past, and we are no different. And I think we have a responsibility to call ourselves out and say, commit to stopping the war and stop any war that Israel wants, certainly on Iran and any other nation there which is basically minding its own business, trying to be independent and sovereign. I have to say, that's all I've got to really add to what Ehsan has given us, a very insightful, very detailed breakdown. Well worth watching the entire show. If you really want to understand what's going on, you'll get a much better idea, I think, after having watched this program. Ehsan, once again, thank you for joining our show. Thank you. And until the next show, please do like, share, subscribe, let other people know about our humble little channel, because we are being suppressed ourselves. We get a lot of sanctioning that goes on. Without your support, we get a lot of censorship as well, because what we say is often a bit too close to the truth, which the mainstream narrative and a lot of the imperialists out there don't want to hear. We're going to carry on saying it regardless, but we need your support as well. Thank you. Take care.